Hey there, folks. Welcome once again. I am so sorry to say that it is again Wednesday at 8 a.m., which means that you are stuck with me here on the Crazy Libertarian, 88.1 FM, and based out of Fargo, Moorhead. Please don't touch that dial. We've got an awesome hour coming up for you today. And the thing that I want to talk about today it's kind of been everywhere lately, but especially as the weather changes, I feel like this conversation always strikes up hotter and hotter. I really want to talk about this global warming stuff, but I want to do it in kind of a different way. Because I feel like this has been talked about a lot, and here's the thing. For the sake of the argument, I'm not even going to deny that global warming is happening. I'm not going to deny the science. None of that. So don't mistake the argument for what it is. Because what I want to point out today is that many of the people that are fighting for climate change and on behalf of this stuff, they have an agenda that they're not telling us about. And going through some really simple logical steps, we can see that this doesn't add up, folks. And what it does add up to is a bunch of people effectively using the third world and very, very, very poor people in order to virtue signal. So I want to start with Greta Thunberg, the ruined childhood girl, whatever her last name is. I probably butchered the saying of it, my bad. But first off, let's look at this weird situation. Got a 16-year-old girl whose family is wealthy enough to own a yacht, who has spoken to the UN, who has met Leonardo DiCaprio. And she has the gall to say that global warming has ruined her childhood. Without making too many assumptions, I'm willing to bet that she's had a better childhood than me. Anyone listening, I'm willing to go as far as to say that she's had one of the best childhoods out of anyone in the world, as a matter of fact, throughout human history. It sounds like a great childhood. I would love for that to be my idea of a ruined childhood. Go around the world on yachts and meet famous actors. Leonardo DiCaprio, if you're listening and you want to buy me a beer sometime, I'm not saying no. But, so that's not a ruined childhood, right? So, what's she doing? She gets up here, she's speaking to the United Nations of all people, which, by the way, I find ridiculous for a lot of reasons. And people acted like when she was talking to the United Nations like she was speaking truth to power. But that's not what happened. Because when you're speaking truth to power, power is not eager to let you speak. That's why you have to speak truth to it in the first place. When you're getting invited to speak in front of a group that has invited Saudi Arabia, a country that's in the middle of a literal genocide, not to mention its horrible stance on human rights for gays, for religious minorities, whole hosts of people, and, the literal genocide that they're committing in Yemen, is on their Human Rights Committee. Why is this the organization that you're apparently going to use to legislate the rest of us into morality on this issue? So, all of this seems a little weird to me if your stated goal is to actually fight climate change, because, using an organization that was founded to protect human rights, that promotes Saudi Arabia to its human rights board in order to fight climate change is a little, it feels either very naive or very, very disingenuous. And like I said, they always claim that they're doing this. They never claim they're doing it for themselves, right? There's always this weird other that they're talking about. There's always this oh, I'm doing it for the poor in the third world, or I'm doing it for the rising sea levels, and all this stuff. Nonsense. Bullcrap. I'm calling it. 5-yard penalty. Replay first down. That doesn't stand. That's ridiculous. And we can figure it out really, really easily that they're only doing it to make themselves feel better. It's a virtue signaling play. I'm not going to say why they are. I'm not going to go into any of that. But at the end of the day, it's either a quasi-religion or a way to avert some rather real personal guilt. Because when you break down what they want to do, it doesn't add up to what they say it will. And here's the thing, right? We can see this pretty easily because there's only one or two things that must be true about these policies, right? Because let's break down the current situation. The developed nations that are pumping out most of these, at the current rate, most of the carbon, have actually been pretty good about reducing their carbon in a relatively lax international regulatory environment. The United States, over the last decade, I believe, has reduced our carbon footprint by 10%. Do you know who's substantially increased their carbon footprint and needs to for logical reasons? Developing nations. Countries that are poor, countries that don't have immediate access. Because here's the thing. You can care about, I don't know, how many tigers are left in the wild when you're not trying to care about which of your 4 kids are going to survive childhood. When you're caring about stuff like that, you've got some rather immediate needs to meet. So you've got some very, very, very poor countries that have a very, very critical urge to develop. And here's the thing, no one can deny that, right? That's one of the stated purposes of the United Nations, is to help these people develop so that they can get out of that crippling poverty that has been humankind's mainstay for most of our existence. So with that in mind, there are only 2 things that these international agreements can logically do when it comes to fighting climate change. So first off, they can allow for poor countries to continue developing, which the Paris Climate Accord did. That was a big reason that it had a lot of critics on the right particularly, is that it went off of the 2015 total carbon outputs. In a way, they were essentially working around the fact that if you want to cut total carbon emissions, that requires not only a very real buy-in from developed nations, like us in Western Europe, but also from countries that are developing, like China has been over the last 2 decades, like India continues to, like numerous countries throughout Southeast Asia, South America, and Africa continue to do. So what's this mean? This means that you need to pick what they've done is they've picked an arbitrary year and said, based off the development of this year, we're going to try to curtail climate change and carbon emissions. Sounds great, but in a few short years, especially with how quickly international trade and development happens and just how quickly change happens in the modern world, those numbers are going to be just that, numbers, pie in the sky. I mean, how much has the global economy and carbon output changed in the last 4 years, let alone over the next 50? So if you allow poor countries to develop, you aren't actually attempting to solve climate change because you're not making a very real determined effort in order to actually do so. Is this logic getting through? What they did with the Paris Climate Accord is they just stuck a number on a wall and stuck to it. That type of approach doesn't allow for, what you need with scientific scrutiny, to redevelop policies, to test it, all that stuff. They're doing what government bureaucrats do best, picking a number in the sand and then acting like that's the law. However, there is one alternative that will actually cut carbon emissions. If you're serious about it, well, listen up, environmentalists, because this is the only way you'll actually do it. This is the only way. You have to, or you cut carbon emissions and don't let them develop. Because here's the thing, if you're actually going to cut carbon emissions, you don't just need to do it from the United States and Western Europe. You need to stop really, really poor people. People that are poorer than you'll ever be. People that are poorer than you have ever been. People that are poorer than you've ever even seen with your own 2 eyes. To not develop because they use carbon at an increased output as they get richer. And as more investment flows in, they use ever more increasing amounts. If you really want to keep that as close to zero as you can, you need to keep them down, particularly because of the opportunity costs associated with all this, right? The United States, being a relatively advanced country, can, although, people like me would argue hellishly against it, can afford to take those few $1 million a year, few billion, whatever, total GDP loss, and rounding out the edges is kind of doable. But in countries where people are living on less than $10 a day, my God, how much of the edge do you want to round off for these poor people? Because here's the other thing. What we lose in this conversation, what we lose in the numbers and the science and the, oh my God, there's no way that 7 billion people can figure out how to deal with a few extra inches of water, chaos of all this, is that much of the economic development that will be curtailed for the reasons that I just mentioned will be in the poorest, in places that need to expend the most carbon, areas. What this means at the end of the day is that they're not arguing for these poor people. They're arguing against the right of many of these poor people to make themselves richer and to get to a point where they can address their ecological concerns on their own level. What they're doing is not protecting some way of life or the oceans. What these activists are actually doing from their yachts, from their speaking points at the United Nations, is advocating to keep people that are poorer than they will ever be poor for longer periods of time so they can feel better. Because here's the thing, like we talked about, there is no earthly way in order to cut carbon emissions without cutting global development at its knees. There just isn't. A lot of the thing, like I said, I mean, even the types of work that these poor countries do, their entire systems tend to be more carbon heavy, environmentally friendly, excuse me. And by the way, we have pretty good evidence that once countries develop, they actually have, once they reach a certain level of development, they actually take into account and start caring about the environment. Because it's almost like when you are relatively sure that you nor your family will die on a day-to-day basis because of something like the fact that your government is oppressive and therefore you can't get food, or the fact that you're living off of $10 a day and you're trying to educate 4 kids on that budget or whatever, you actually start to have the time and the money and the effort to care about these things. So do you know what works for this problem? Do you know what's a great solution to climate change? Do you know what's a great solution to rising sea levels and all this stuff? Innovation. The only thing that's worked for the last for the last however long that humans have been around, the only thing that's pulled us from the muck, especially over the last few hundred years, has been innovation, has been trade, has been more separate, sovereign individuals acting together in their own self-interest to figure out solutions. And that's what we need here. Because here's the thing. Assuming that the worst about climate change has been said, and assuming that the worst models are true, it is already far too late and we need to start figuring out how we can adapt. Assuming that we still have time, we need to weigh the costs of future innovation, the costs of these government bureaucrats. And by the way, let's not forget that any assumption about this climate change stuff, even assuming that the people pushing it are acting in good faith, even assuming that they really want to cut climate change, invariably, you need to have faith in that government. You need to have faith in several levels of bureaucracy interacting with each other, each one made up of an individual looking for their own self-interest, not necessarily that of the wholes, in order to work together. And then you need to assume that it can be reflexive and responsive and do all those great things to save the environment. If you've ever been to the DMV, I'm sure that you have all the proof you need to see that that is not how that process will go in the first place. But what does work? Innovation and change are the solutions that will get us out of this climate crisis. And here's why. First off, the people that are going to be most affected will be better able to deal with it if they live in a developed country, if they have, means to, buy things like cars or automobiles, or have access to good governance, all of which increasingly comes with free trade, comes with economic growth, all of that stuff. We need countries that are somewhat stable, and once again, growth leads to stability, especially when it's done in a very free market way. And finally, I just really want to hit on this one point. The people that they always claim to help are those that invariably, if we were to bring these people on our program, I'm sure that their number one, and we have polls about this, by the way, for various poor countries of the world when we're able to get accurate polling out of the area, their number one concern are things that we don't even begin to think about in the West. Their number one concern, And what should be our number one concern, what should be humanity's number one concern, is getting us out of the muck that we have been in for our entire histories and picking people up. And the only thing that picks people up out of poverty is capitalism. That the tests have been ran, the studies have been proven. Freedom, choice, innovation, and trade are our best tools for dealing with any crisis. Government mandates, especially when they come from people that are only in it in order to feel better about themselves, because I don't care how eco-friendly your yacht is, that's a whole lot of carbon emission. So are private plane rides, Leonardo DiCaprio, just so you're aware. So we're taking the words of people that are only doing it to feel better about themselves while they participate in acts that obviously objectively make the situation much worse, but we won't really go into that too much, in order to have an outsized control on not only our economy, not only the international economy, but on how people that are poorer than you will ever be. I want to stress that again. I cannot put enough emphasis on that. If you had to live for a day the way that some of these people in the third world have to live and the realities that they have to deal with, you would be screaming for your way of life back. But yet these cowards continue to pretend like they know what's best for the developing world. And furthermore, like the government has acted in any way like it's responsible enough to deal with such a circumstance like that. I mean, gosh, it kind of seems like every time the United States government intervenes in a foreign country for their benefit, horrible things seem to happen. We intervened a lot in Latin America in the 1980s, as people on 88.1 FM are no doubt aware of. And look how that turned out. We intervened for the benefit of the people in Iraq in the early 2000s. And how's that going for them? Maybe the interventions in Syria to bring about democracy have worked. I mean, I know that we've brought back a roaring slave market in Libya after American interventions. But, oh wait, that wasn't their stated goal there, was it? They were going to bring peace, democracy, and education for all. Funny how that works. So you're taking arguably the least trustworthy group of people on Earth and allowing them to be fueled by people with bad motivations over for a future that we don't know about, based on dubious claims that at the end of the day keeps people that are far poorer than you or I will ever be poor for longer, just essentially so that a certain group of people can feel better or allow themselves to be manipulated, depending on how you want to see it. So what am I getting at today? I guess, in essence, if you've been paying attention and you're a student of classical liberalism, and I encourage you to be if you're not, the charts that show the tremendous drop in global poverty at an absolute or relative number over the last 200 to 300 years are staggering. The increase in living expectancy and all those great things in income and quality of life have been staggering and have been because of the modern, relatively free market, relatively laissez-faire economic system. So, for some reason, that all goes out the window when it comes to this, right? So I just want people to look back, and I want people to once again think critically about it. Because here's the thing, and like I said, even assuming that all the science, as they put it, is 100% accurate and all that stuff, do we really think that the situation in 3 years is going to be aided after 3 years of... Is it going to be better because of, let's say, 3 years of innovation, growth, more people being added to the global economy, more people presenting local solutions to local and global problems? Or is the solution to these complex, incredibly difficult, and incredibly costly and advanced problems to be put in the hands of governmental and even intergovernmental bureaucrats, each working in their own self-interest while claiming to work for you? I don't know about you, but based on the results of the last 20th century and what's happened to free peoples when we've trusted complex problems to government versus what's happened when we've left it to innovation and for the free market and change to bring about progress, I would like to ride with innovation. And you know what? For that matter, I would really, really, really like it if people that in their average week put out more carbon than I do in my entire year would please stop lecturing me, and people that are far, far, far poorer than me in my 2003 Buick LeSabre, to stop lecturing people and take personal responsibility. Because, maybe I would be inclined to believe Greta a little bit more if she wasn't kissing up to, I don't know, an organization that has Saudi Arabia on its Human Rights Council. Right, once again, if you're going for justice and you're going for efficiency, maybe don't go for the people that put, the United Nations put Saudi Arabia, a country that, kills gay people, that until recent, I don't know if they changed it very recently or not, but women weren't allowed to leave the house without their husbands, that executes people in certain religions, horrible things, commits a genocide in Yemen on their Human Rights Council. And also, don't trust the people that take printing out a driver's license and turn it into an hour to a 2-hour-long process to be in charge of efficiency and innovation, because neither of those are going to work very well. So we've got a great interview coming up with Raheem Williams. Please do not touch that dial. Do not move from that stream. This has been the Crazy Libertarian. And I'm really sick of very rich, guilty people using us and people way poorer than us to make themselves feel better. Let's think about that for a while. Hey there, folks. Welcome back to the Crazy Libertarian on 88.1 FM. For those of you that are watching on the live stream, I feel like it's on a need-to-know basis, but we got a new government grant in terms of an invisibility cloak, but it only works for about this much, so bear with us while we keep that in mind. But my new secret agent friend, who some of you may have unfortunately seen before, is none other than Raheem Williams. Raheem, tell us a little bit about yourself.
My name's Raheem, and I'm just a guy. I really, really value transparency in everything I do. And as you can see, it's literally oozing out of me. So with that in mind, let's just get into this. Some people, I wear different hats. Here, I'm here as Bradley's friend. I call him B-Rad because it sounds like a corny white boy rapper name.
That's next week's show.
We'll dig deeper later. There's some deep psychology renaming people there, but nonetheless, I'm here to talk about some regulatory econ in regards to some of the things we see in relation to climate change. At least that's what I was told. Where this conversation goes, only God knows.
Yeah, we are not making any promises for the second half of it, but to recap for the fine people, in the first half, in the first part of the show, we kind of talked about how, in essence, we have a bunch of people that are way richer than you or me, way richer than many people in the third world could ever dream of, burning up carbon to go.
I'm way richer than most of the third world. Okay,
yeah.
I'm not trying to brag here, but that's hardly an accomplishment as an American.
Well, yeah, but my point being, so you have people that are richer than, bounds beyond what we could ever reasonably hope to achieve, right?
I'm pretty ambitious.
Well, when your 16-year-old can speak to the United Nations after taking a vacation on a yacht to complain about climate change.
It wasn't a vacation. She was traveling to the United Nations on the yacht that wasn't hers, okay?
Yes.
It was a friend's, because all of our friends have yachts, I like to believe.
Yep. For those of you that have been holding out on me, show me your yacht. But, so we've been talking about all these.
This is a difficult area of the world for yachting, by the way. It's one of the drawbacks of living this far inland. I do miss my yachting days.
So it's you with the yacht.
I don't have a yacht. I have friends.
Well, I know that one's a lot, so where's your yacht? But anyhow, folks, so we've been talking about these really rich people effectively virtue signaling at the expense of everyone else, right? Mm-hmm. We talked about essentially you allow these people to develop and acknowledge that they're going to increase total carbon output, or you actually cut carbon output but cripple generations of people in developing countries.
Okay, so I'm going to play devil's advocate. As a climate activist, I just want you to know that I don't actually care about humans.
That is fair.
So, when you listen to climate activists and environmentalists, the human concern isn't something they actually care about. They never pretend to. So as an economist, I agree with you. Like trying to skip the Industrial Revolution, which is essentially what these plans are. They're like, hey, you're going to go straight from agrarian society and subsistence farming into high-tech advanced society, and we're going to skip Industrial Revolution. There's very little, I'd argue, no evidence of that ever happening successfully in the history of mankind. What we can see is shorter periods of industrialization, kind of like China was able to do it in a very short period of time.
Bang that carbon out in a 20-year footprint. Let's get it done, folks.
But exactly, it came at the cost of really, really high carbon emissions. And right now, China emits more carbon than both the United States and the EU combined.
And mind you, China is like, there's still some parts of China that are still developing, so this is not
it's not a developed country. They're nowhere near done.
So, and this doesn't even begin to touch like other Southeast countries like Bangladesh, Malaysia.
And that was one of the bigger problems with President Trump and the Paris Climate Accord. The Paris Climate Accord was negotiated by the Obama administration and the rest of the world, and is extremely globally elitist club. And what it had was America, along with some other developed countries, basically contributing billions of dollars to what they had was a green energy fund. And that's tax dollars from you and I, and it was going to go to basically speed up the adaptation of green tech in poor countries. Now, the issue with this is a lot of these are Banana Republic, tinfoil hat dictator type of regimes that could basically take the money and lie about their adaptation and their carbon emissions, and there's nothing you could do about it. So
they do the same things in those countries as they do in our own government? Shocking.
Yeah, exactly, with even less transparency, and as we've established before, I'm really big on that. So
listen, Raheem is more transparent right now than our federal government, so I've been led to believe that some of those
I'm likely to remain to be more transparent than all levels of government for the foreseeable future. But again, that's a very low bar.
Even in the dark room.
So what we're getting, I'm not quite sure if that's doable. And that's another aspect of the Paris Climate Accord is that it actually didn't require countries like China, India, Pakistan, I think those developing countries or so-called developing countries to curb emissions until 2030. They would cap them at wherever they were at 2030, and then they can curb from there. So the incentive was actually to emit more, as much as you can, until 2030 to make the reduction even cheaper.
And as we talked about earlier in the show, for the numbers that they base the initial who's paying in, who's getting out, they just kind of pick carbon emission numbers from 2015, which is totally arbitrary with how actual economic development and innovation and stuff happens over long term, over
again,
5 years, over 15 years.
It's important that we go back to like you sound like a rational human being, and you got to be careful with that, because we're talking about the environmental lobby, and they're not rational people, and they don't actually like people. These are the exact same people who believe that we should take our tax dollars and use it to abort babies in the third world, generally brown babies. I wish I was making this up, but I'm not. In the name of climate change, they want to abort. They want to kill humans. They believe there should be less humans on this earth. So when you say, oh, human suffering, human quality of life, they're saying, what about the earth? Like, the earth takes precedent over humans, period, in their calculus, and you can't forget that. So saying, oh, well, these poor people are going to have a tough time, they're like, okay, well, they shouldn't exist in the first place.
That's a good point.
That's their argument.
And I think that's one of the things that I really want to kind of bring up on this show from time to time with my banter about critical thinking, is that all of this stuff, everything that we've like achieved in the last 400 years has come exactly at the moment when we've become more humanist in our thinking. It's come at the moment when we've seen how we can develop mankind as a whole, that we've gotten out of these things. So shifting back to that, what's the phrase? To that almost different ethical grounds, you know what I mean? Especially when you hear like some of the actual, and I recognize that this isn't 95% of the people that are marching in these like environmental protests and whatever, but some of these people are actual eco-fascists.
Yeah,
Like,
easily. And some of them are eco-terrorists. Like,
yeah.
it's also not unheard of.
Those
They're
things
very
happen.
shameless in that regard.
They do way more than freeing those cute little monkeys. Way more than that.
I just, you think of environmentalists as tree huggers. We don't have a lot of trees out here on the plains. So generally, we just think of them more as nuisance rodents. But nonetheless, I understand that there is actually a need for good environmental maintenance and to be stewards of our environment. So it's not that their positions have no merit at all. I don't want to build a straw man per se. We have one Earth and we should take care of it. But there is a balancing act at which how much are we willing to give up in terms of quality of life and attaining higher quality of life for the people here on this earth and to basically in an attempt, and I want to emphasize that it's an attempt to turn international governments into a giant thermostat. And one of those things utterly ridiculous to me personally, but maybe to other people, they're like, yeah, the government can be a thermostat because they have a almost religious view of the state where like it is like literally divine in its existence and capable of doing any and everything. So when people view the state in that direction, which a lot of people do on the more ideological left.
Oh no, they do it on the right too. They just do it about different stuff. Let's not. Oh, come on. You know what? No. I have heard several thousand people at this point. It makes just as much sense to say that we can trust the government to act as an international thermostat as it does to say that building a wall will in any way deter drugs getting into this country, deter immigration legally or illegally, or will do anything except be a massive waste of taxpayer dollars. It is
let's take a step back.
It is foolish to assume that we can
build a wall.
It is foolish to assume just as equally, if not more equally, on the same science.
I don't even want to defend the wall. I just want to go ahead and say how these are worlds different, because one is like literally a actual physical construct of some freaking steel slabs. Right, and what we're talking about is a highly coordinated effort. Like, yeah, you could build a wall. What you're arguing is it won't work. That's different. That's fair enough. But that's like to say like giving God-like characteristics of government. It's like, okay, the wall, you don't think it'll work. Whatever. Let's say the wall won't work. Okay, that's dumb. Government does dumb things. I'm not going to deny that. But that's not like a God-like feature of it.
But it takes the same level of faith. Because here's the thing, I'm an equal opportunity offender on the Crazy Libertarian. What's that song? Jokers to the left, clowns to the right. It's terrifying, and they all way outnumber me. So I'm trying to raise some awareness of this out here. But the people on the right do it too. Because here's the thing, if any of this sounds ridiculous to you, just apply it to so many of the arguments that our friends on the left and the right like to use. Drug prohibition, for example. The idea that we can tax and tariff our way into any kind of prosperity, the idea that mercantilism, an idea which died in the 1700s, can somehow make us billionaires. There are so many of these ideas that rely on the idea of a government that not only acts in good faith, but they can act in utterly perfect way.
In regards to mercantilism, even though definitely Trump has a questionable relationship with that, I don't think that's uniform on the right or left. Just to be very clear, there are definitely people on the left that still believe in free trade, and there are definitely people on the right that still believe in free trade. So,
but my point being, it's a way of viewing the government, right? That's the big thing. It's a way of
what I stated was a religious-like view of the government. I don't believe the right has a religious-like view of the government. I do believe they do believe in government. It's not religious. They're said very different.
I seem to have maybe I had an aneurysm just now, but didn't we have like decades of debate about whether two men could marry each other largely because of their religious views concerning the right? And how it pertains to government and what the role of government is and how they act. That's the thing. There's a base level assumption about government here.
But like even when in that case, what you're saying is a religious view influence government, not the view that government is religious.
Well, no, but I'm
So
saying
it's like even the causality there is a little off.
No,
It's
no,
like they believe in religion outside of government, and they take those religious institutional views and place it into the state. What I'm saying is they believe the state. Leftists believe the state is almost effectively God.
Listen, Raheem, I can see through way more of you than just this stripe here, all right? Because that same theory is working
I'm just pointing
on
out
the other side. Because here's the thing, when you listen to those, if you actually go back and listen to the debates about gay marriage, it's always the sky's going to fall and the
I mean, we are
end.
talking about actively. We are talking about actively chemically castrating children in the name of LGBTQ tolerance. So the slippery slope argument wasn't so far fetched.
So
we're kind of here. We see this with child drag shows. So like this saying there's
which
like no
represents all of the people that were involved with that movement. Surely that represents 100%.
I mean, they're oddly quietly silent when it comes to condemning this. So
I will give you that. There are people that need to up their game in that attitude. But my point being, it's a way in viewing how society works and how the government functions. Because even in those debates, what was implicitly said is that those who were against gay marriage said that the best way to protect our moral decency, the best way to make sure that our kids grow up to be right, just whatever nonsense arguments they used, is for the government to step up in this way. And there's an inherent lack of I find that oddly enough, even though governments continue to fail at an ever-increasing level, we see more faith in government and less questioning.
I want to take a step away from the whole gay marriage issue, mostly because it's settled law, so it's irrelevant.
That's true.
So
we won on gay marriage, and we're winning on marijuana too, folks. Don't forget.
I'm not a part of this. Nonetheless, what I'm saying is, what in your whole causal effect there, what you're saying is that because our government has been traditionally heavily influenced by Judeo-Christian norms, that is as being the same as people on the right seeing the government as like a religion or a religious, like people don't, how do you say this, think the government is God on the right. That's not true. And they don't assign it God-like qualities such as,
yes, I do.
ridding the world of disease. Everybody gets health care and housing. Like that's almost inherently very Marxist, in which that you create heaven on earth through the state.
Really? Because that sounds very similar to the thinking that we would get rid of the scourge of drugs in our inner cities and communities. Years ago,
no, it's not, because
by the right. Sounds very similar.
The drug war, and to the extent is like, and there's also research that shows this, is about discouraging consumption. That's why you make anything illegal.
Worked.
It's like we're all aware that having speeding laws doesn't mean nobody will ever speed. The idea is to discourage it, and to say it doesn't discourage it is a little dishonest. It's like that is it does discourage consumption.
No, it doesn't. The drug consumption and the drug addiction rates have held steady since the beginning of the war on drugs. My point being, what all of this has in common is that all requires an intensive amount of what ifs that most people on the right and to the left actively ignore. Most of these people just click on faith. And I think that is the larger discussion that we need to be having. And here's the thing. The only thing that the war on drugs did, I believe it was Milton Friedman that said this, was to incentivize the drug cartels.
I mean, I agree with that. I'm not going to deny.
It has not decreased consumption
economics of it. But my cue here, or my main rejection of the argument isn't if the drug war on drugs was successful or whatnot. The intuition behind it is actually not even remotely religious, and also not even remotely right wing. The intuition was that, hey, people are dying of heroin or overdoses. Crackheads are breaking into my house to go get crack. Is this should definitely be discouraged by the state. Most sensible people do believe that and still believe that, and they're not necessarily wrong to. So my thing is that's not necessarily a religious thing. So far as
because
you're saying the argument isn't that, oh, if you make it illegal, nobody will do it. Okay, theft is illegal. People still steal things. That isn't rationale to say theft should be legal now.
No,
like, that's
but
dumb.
it is a
Like,
question.
It doesn't make sense.
But when we prohibit theft, we do it because we think that it'll lead to better outcomes for more people. And prohibiting drugs, leading to the rise of black markets, cartels, whatever, have all obviously.
And again, that's a policy argument. You can, and I will
That is a
definitely
policy,
agree.
but here's the thing.
It's like that's
But
not
here's the
giving
thing.
a godlike.
Here's the thing.
Yeah.
What you're doing is you're assigning the government a massive amount of power, knowledge, whatever it is, that it can successfully bend society into some just form with a few laws or a few prohibitions or
the
massive
crack epidemic did end.
The crack epidemic did end, although oddly enough, it wasn't started until after the war on drugs, so I don't really... And we have a little bit of evidence that the CIA may have looked the other way for a little cocaine coming through from certain banana republics that we were funding
we
at
have
the time.
ample evidence that they brought it in, but that's besides the point.
But here's the thing:
we got away from climate change so fast.
But we stayed on the point that we keep on at this show. That, and I'm gonna quote the SOB, even though he was wrong, but as Ronald Reagan said, government is not the solution to the problem. Oftentimes, government is the problem. So what I really, really just want to, while I can with all my might, because I feel like we've said some stuff on the show today that's going to, when we're reading the comments, I'm sure that some Republicans are going to be pretty pissed off about some of the stuff that we said. I'm sure some Democrats are going to be pretty pissed off about some of the stuff we said.
Screw 'em.
Which to me makes for a good show. If I'm irritating both sides and I'm speaking a little truth. But we really need to start questioning when government says it's going to do something, how are you going to do it?
That's
Why are they
fair
gonna
enough.
do it?
Like the process
Where are
matters.
they going to do it?
The process
that's
matters.
Right.
It matters a lot.
And when you give empty faith to some politician because he says he's, I don't know, going to make America great again, or because they're going to save the environment and bring Bambi back, and they're going to execute the hunter that shot his mother or something like that.
Oh, no.
What we need to...
Not Bambi.
I mean, I think Bambi's mom had it coming. Different debate for a different day.
I mean, I like venison.
I am not a dearist, I'm a humanist. But my point being, all of these arguments require an immense amount of faith, and most people, for some reason, even though we have like an increasing amount of people that identify as atheist or agnostic, we haven't seen a decrease in the amount of people that say, oh, government's going to take money from me at gunpoint and then give it back to me later, and I can't say no. Well, yes, we should expand such a program like that. There's a lot of simple...
That was a very interesting segue, and I have to ask you to explain a little bit more here. Atheist and the state. Like, so are you saying if more people are atheists, they shouldn't believe in the state?
No.
Like, you can't be a religious anarchist? Like, that was a very interesting intertwining of concepts.
That was my point being that we have... When you see the increase in atheists, when you actually read the polls, most people say that, like, they grew more skeptical, they didn't believe, whatever.
So you're saying they don't believe in God, but they still believe in the state.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I'm not making a claim on religion here. I don't really like to get into that on the show. Believe what you want to believe. Just don't tax me to do it.
Believe in Jesus.
But whichever iteration of him you may choose to. But
is that
the really big thing?
Is that an ode to my black Jesus?
That is an ode to that painting. But,
I have a black Jesus in my living room. It's my preferred Jesus. I'm not trying to hear anything from the comments section, by the way. Oh, he really looked Palestinian. I don't care. He's black in my house. So
you're damn sure that we had a German-looking Jesus hanging up in our... My point being... any argument that any pro-secular from like any argument for keeping religion out of government could almost be used to keep government out of a lot of these societal problems to begin with.
I don't believe in that.
That's kind of, how do you mean?
I mean, I question the whole, I don't question the separation of church and state. I question the modern interpretation of that in regards to the Establishment Clause in the First Amendment. So a lot of people take that to mean like, how, Notre Dame is a Catholic school in name only, but let's just say they really were Catholic in actual practice. It would be illegal for them to receive any like Pell Grants for the students there. Now, I have my own problems with government subsidized education, but I don't necessarily believe that. That was an issue in a Supreme Court case where a public city or municipality was paying a church to maintenance its park, but the park was open to the public, so that was their excuse. And people were like, well, it's violates separation of religious and state. So some people take that to the nth degree that I don't believe is actually accurate. So that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is, in the same way that we have an inherent separation of church and state in this society, and that most people generally agree that like religious things ought not to, and obviously we can argue about the merit or about the grayer areas and all this other stuff.
There are gray areas.
But we generally agree, wouldn't it be nice if we could have a separation of society and state? Wouldn't it be nice if we could acknowledge that there are some problems that are best dealt with
I agree.
non-governmental, non-forceful,
I absolutely agree.
non-putting
And
people in cages, non-spending your damn tax dollars, by the way, on it?
And this is what I believe to be probably one of the best libertarian contributions in terms of political thought, is that there should be a heavy bias against government intervention. I'm not a libertarian because most libertarians end the conversation right there. They're like, there should be no government intervention. We're done here. I'm like, well, that should be definitely the starting point of analysis by all means, but it's not necessarily the end. Bradley generally disagrees. I'm not okay with crack needles littering the streets. Bradley's perfectly okay with crack needles littering the streets and giving them out for free.
I'm sorry, my policies haven't led to to needles littering the streets. His son of a gun policies have led to needles littering the streets. Yeah.
Whoa,
Prohibition.
bro. What?
Prohibition.
I didn't start voting until 2012. I didn't have nothing to do with it. I was just a guy.
Well, you're supporting people that continue to support prohibition. And you want to know when you find needles in the streets, folks?
In San Francisco.
When you take a bunch of people and deny them access to opportunity, which is the problem. Because opportunity and innovation solve a lot of social problems. And from a libertarian perspective, maybe we should let them solve.
I'm just saying, theoretically, I really don't believe increasing access to hard drugs and lowering the cost somehow equates to less addicts.
We would be decreasing access to more dangerous drugs like fentanyl and carfentanil while increasing access to more known drugs.
Well, if you're against prohibition of all drugs, how the hell are you decreasing access?
Because people that end up overdosing, especially in the latest wave, have died because they've gotten drugs that are cut with unclear, unknown substances. If they were to buy them on the legal market, they would be able to know what they would get.
So you want to increase access with regulation?
I want to increase access via regulation via the tort system, effectively. Where if you say that this is 100%, I don't know, let's say that right now, if you buy 100% water and it has alcohol in it, you can sue them, right? Like, let's do that for other drugs.
All right, sounds like a great plan, man. I can't imagine how it could go wrong. I mean, I can, but just for the sake of moving on from this argument, I can't.
I hear you. I guess I could call about...
We can go back to drug policy.
I could call about 20 million incarcerated people. And
not all drug related. Some are legitimately violent.
Yeah, about 10%, yeah.
So
very small.
Most of the people in prison are not harmless drug offenders. That's a myth.
But too many of them are.
True.
And as a matter of fact, one of them are far too many of them. But here's the thing, folks.
I agree. You're preaching to the choir on that.
We just had a lot of wide-ranging discussions, including on environmentalism, all that. But
I didn't even get to talk crap about California, and that's heartbreaking.
Well, we can see through to how you really feel, Raheem. We can see through to it.
I wish you could, because this line would be red.
Give him time, folks. He'll come around. But I want to thank you all, and I want to really close out one more time. Please, just the next time you hear a politician make a promise, do an internal dialogue. Start asking questions. Start kind of pushing it around in your head. Kick the tires a little bit.
You should do that next time you make a promise, too.
Yep.
Can I keep this? Do I really even want to?
That is it works in both public and private policy, as a matter of fact. But seriously, because you know what? From my perspective, we would be spending a lot less money on boneheaded problems.
On behalf of the politicians, let's be honest, who gets elected saying, hey, constituents, I'm going to do a lot less? My plan is to get in that role and try to do as little as possible.
That is true. Well, I mean,
nobody's going to vote for that guy. I mean, I would. I'd be like, that's what I need you to do. Don't write any laws. Don't pass anything. I don't care if you go to work. A Congress that never meets will be the best Congress.
well, that's how Calvin Coolidge got in there. Maybe we need to start sparking up some discussion to make those people winnable.
There's like something,
If elected,
I'm calling this
do nothing.
wrong, but it's common in politics. It's something like the action, or call the action fallacy, is that every problem demands a political response. And it's like, that's just not true. And we need to pivot away from that in society.
Absolutely. And you know what? That is a great place to leave off. Thank you so much for listening. This has been the Crazy Libertarian on 88.1 FM. I am your host, the crazy and principled Bradley Foster, with my guest,
Raheem Williams, just a guy.
Raheem Williams, just a guy. Both halves of them are great. Thanks so much for coming on. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.